Nobody expects a 777 to vanish. It just doesn't happen.
Where is Malaysia Airlines Flight 370?
Debris found off the coast of Reunion Island in the Indian Ocean.
The second piece of MH370's wreckage picked up.
For 10 years, the world has been desperately looking in the wrong place for MH370. Governments spent over $200 million scanning the seafloor, following satellite data that led to nothing but frustration and scattered debris. Official theories blamed the pilot, while families were left with silence and speculation. In the middle of this failure, a retired British engineer named Richard Godfrey.
You believe you know exactly where MH370 is?
That's correct, yes.
Stepped forward with a shocking method no one took seriously. Using obscure radio signals, he says he found the precise location of MH370.
Using radio signals as a radar system to track MH370s.
More importantly, he brought data to back it up. Some dismissed it. Others were stunned.
You have been able to track its every movement.
Yeah, from takeoff right to the end.
The data he revealed has left experts stunned. The night MH370 vanished. March 8, 2014, began like any other night for Malaysia Airlines flight MH370. The plane, a Boeing 777, left the runway at Kuala Lumpur International Airport at exactly 12:41 a.m. It was heading to Beijing. On board were 239 people. There were business travelers, tourists, families, and even small children. Everyone expected a routine flight. No one expected that this would be the last time the aircraft would be seen with certainty. For the first 40 minutes, everything seemed normal. The plane climbed steadily. Communication between the pilots and air traffic control was calm and uneventful. There were no signs of trouble. At 1:19 a.m., a Malaysian controller instructed the crew to contact Vietnamese airspace as they were leaving Malaysia's radar coverage. The pilot responded with one final sentence. He said, "Good night, Malaysian 370. That was the last time anyone ever heard from the cockpit.
Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9. Good night.
Malaysian 370.
2 minutes later, at 1:21 a.m., the plane's transponder went dark. The transponder is a small but critical device. It sends the aircraft's identity, speed, and altitude to radar stations on the ground. Without it, the plane becomes invisible to civilian radar systems. MH370 was now gone from all civilian tracking. However, the Malaysian military was watching. Their radar works differently. Instead of waiting for a transponder signal, it sends out its own signals and waits for reflections, much like sonar. Military radar picked up something that was never meant to be seen. It was no longer headed for Beijing. It had turned back toward Malaysia. This was not a slight error or slow curve. It was a clean, sharp turn. That meant someone in the cockpit was still flying the plane and doing it with control and purpose. MH370 flew back across the Malaysian peninsula. It crossed its own original flight path. Then it kept flying northwest, heading into the Andaman Sea. At 2:22 a.m., it disappeared from military radar as well. After that, there was nothing. There were no distress calls. No emergency codes were sent. No signs of technical failure were reported. The plane did not crash into mountains or cities. It simply vanished into the darkness over the ocean. For most flights, when something goes wrong, pilots try to communicate. Here, there was complete silence. That silence became one of the most terrifying parts of the mystery. But MH370 was not completely silent. The aircraft's satellite data unit, a device used to send maintenance signals, reconnected with a satellite in orbit. This connection created what investigators call handshakes. These are automatic pings sent between the aircraft and the satellite. They continued for nearly 6 more hours until 8:19 a.m. These pings became the only clues left. They offered no location, no voice, and no flight data. Just silent timestamps. Investigators used this information to try to understand where the plane had gone. But even after years of searching, nothing solid came from it. From the very beginning, this did not seem like a normal crash. It felt planned. The sharp turn, the radio silence, the disabled transponder, and the long flight into the middle of nowhere all pointed to something deliberate. That is what made this case so terrifying. No one knew who was behind it or why they did it. And the deeper investigators looked, the more confusing it became. And that is what pushed investigators to build a theory. The search that cost $200 million and failed. The official theory, accepted by governments and media alike, seemed airtight. It was built on a set of pings exchanged between MH370 and a satellite owned by Inmarsat, a British company. These pings estimated the plane's distance and direction. The process seemed scientific, but the assumptions buried inside it would prove to be devastating. 2 data points drove the theory. The first was BTO, or Burst Timing Offset. This measured how long it took each ping to travel between the plane and the satellite. That helped calculate the plane's distance from the satellite. The second was BFO, or Burst Frequency Offset. This measured small shifts in the signal's frequency. These shifts were thought to show whether the plane was moving toward or away from the satellite. Using these 2 values, investigators drew 2 paths, one toward the north over Asia. That was ruled out quickly. Too many military radars covered that region. The second path pointed south into the empty Indian Ocean. And that became the story and theory that gave birth to the 7th arc. Each time the plane sent a satellite handshake, it created a possible ring of distance around the satellite. The 7th and final handshake, received at 8:19 a.m. on March 8th, created the 7th of these rings or arcs. That ring, when plotted on a map, formed a long curved line stretching across the southern Indian Ocean. Officials believed the plane had run out of fuel shortly after that final ping and crashed somewhere along this last arc. Afterward, a massive search followed. Australia, Malaysia, and China poured over $200 million into it. Sophisticated underwater vehicles, sonar scanners, and ships mapped 120,000 square kilometers of ocean floor. The zone was about the size of Pennsylvania, but they found nothing. No fuselage, no black boxes, no seats, no answers. This broke people. Families felt crushed all over again. Their hopes rose and collapsed each time a sonar blip turned out to be just rocks or debris from something else. Everyone kept asking the same question. How could they get it this wrong? The only real physical clue came a year later. A single wing part, a flaperon, washed up on Reunion Island. It confirmed the plane had broken apart, but it did not confirm where. In fact, it made things worse. The damage pattern looked violent. That clashed with the idea of a soft water landing. Some experts said it proved the crash wasn't controlled at all. Others said it hinted at something more deliberate. The official search team admitted their calculations were based on guesses. They had assumed the plane flew straight. They had assumed autopilot was on. They had assumed fuel burn matched models. None of that could be verified. What this failure did was worse than wasting money. It destroyed trust. It opened the floodgates for doubt, anger, and suspicion. People began to wonder if the crash zone was never in the Indian Ocean at all. That single doubt shattered the official story, and it forced new minds to step forward, not with more theories, but with better questions. One of them was a quiet, relentless engineer named Richard Godfrey. He would spend years analyzing the data in ways no one else dared to. And when he finally spoke, the world would have no choice but to listen. But before anyone could accept a new explanation, they had to re-examine the people involved. And that started with the man in the cockpit, the pilot whose actions that night would divide experts for years. The pilot profile that shattered the narrative. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah was 53 years old and had logged over 18,000 hours of flight time. He had a clean record and decades of experience with Malaysia Airlines. At first glance, he did not fit the image of someone planning a deadly event. But as investigators struggled to find mechanical causes, they began to focus on something much harder to explain. They started asking whether this could have been done on purpose, and whether Zahari could have been the one who planned it. The media pushed a clear idea. They suggested Zahari had hijacked his own flight and taken his passengers with him in a planned suicide. This was a simple theory that gave people something to hold on to. But when investigators looked deeper, they found that the evidence did not really support it. Zahari did not leave a suicide note. No one found signs of depression or mental instability in the weeks before the flight. He had no known history of violent behavior. There was no record of religious or political extremism. Even his family and friends said he was stable and deeply committed to his job.
I'm a friend of Captain Zahari. He is a very friendly, caring, and very professional guy who's committed to his job and who loves flying.
But one detail changed everything. Authorities found that Zahari had a flight simulator at home. This is not unusual for experienced pilots, but when they examined his saved flight paths, they discovered one simulated route that ended in the southern Indian Ocean. It looked similar to the suspected flight path of MH370. This raised serious alarms. It made many people believe he had rehearsed the crash in advance, but even that evidence was not solid. The flight path was incomplete. It had been manually deleted and only recovered through advanced forensic tools. And according to experts, the simulator route could have been the result of scattered test flights stitched together from different sessions. There was no proof it was one continuous, intentional route. Even with these doubts, Zahari became the main focus of suspicion. But when people started to examine his actions more closely, the details raised even more questions. Whoever was in control of the plane turned off the transponder within a very short 2-minute window. That kind of move requires planning and focus. Then, the plane turned sharply back toward Malaysia and flew across the peninsula, directly into military radar coverage. If this was a suicide plan, why risk detection? Why not just crash immediately? Then came the strangest part. After the turn, the plane flew in silence for more than 6 hours. No distress signal, no calls, nothing. It stayed hidden while staying in the air.
The plane had kept flying for another 6 hours. But with all its communication systems dead, where it had gone was anyone's guess.
Experts found this deeply confusing. A suicide would normally happen quickly. The long, controlled flight made it harder to believe this was just a pilot giving up. Some analysts began to say this was not a suicide. It looked more like a message, or possibly a protest aimed at someone. Others said it may not have been Zahari at all. Someone else could have taken over the cockpit. This has happened before. In 2023, an Ethiopian Airlines co-pilot locked his captain out and tried to hijack the plane. The risk of cockpit breaches is real. In the end, the pilot's suicide theory started to fall apart. But Richard's proof may show that this theory was probably never totally wrong. With nothing to prove pilot's involvement at the time, people turned their attention elsewhere. They began asking even more terrifying questions. If this was not about suicide, then what was really going on in the aircraft that night? To find that answer, we need to stop focusing on who was flying the plane and start asking what was being carried inside it. Because buried in the cargo manifest was a list of items that never should have been ignored. What was in the cargo hold? The secret nobody wants to talk about. The cargo manifest for MH370 listed nearly 2.5 tons of lithium-ion batteries and a large shipment of radio accessories. Alongside this was an unusually large quantity of mangosteens, a tropical fruit not commonly exported in bulk by air. On paper, these items appeared harmless, but when experts began to examine the details more closely, they uncovered something deeply unsettling. Lithium-ion batteries are not ordinary cargo. They are known hazards. These batteries have caused fires on commercial aircraft before. They can overheat and ignite under pressure or heat. In several past incidents, battery fires forced emergency landings and cabin evacuations. Aviation guidelines require strict labeling and handling for this type of cargo. But in MH370's case, the cargo was labeled in vague terms. The documents referred to radio accessories without naming the devices or manufacturers. The serial numbers were incomplete. There was no clear explanation of who the final recipient was supposed to be. This raised serious concerns. Some aviation safety experts questioned why a high-risk cargo shipment was approved for a long passenger flight without stricter controls. Others noticed something even more unusual. Shortly after the plane disappeared, a Malaysian customs officer was arrested in a case connected to cargo documentation fraud. Officials never linked him publicly to MH370, but the timing was suspicious. He had worked in the same division responsible for inspecting air freight before takeoff. There were also questions about why China took such an active interest in the cargo. Chinese officials reportedly requested detailed cargo records and pressured Malaysian authorities to release more information. Some researchers believe the radio accessories might not have been ordinary parts. There is speculation that the equipment was dual-use technology, possibly with military or intelligence value. This could mean someone had a reason to interfere with the flight. If the plane was carrying sensitive equipment, it might have attracted the attention of state actors or smugglers. The possibility of sabotage was no longer far-fetched. Some investigators proposed that a fire may have broken out mid-flight, caused by overheating batteries. Others suggested a more chilling scenario. The plane may have been diverted or tampered with by someone who wanted control of the cargo. That would mean this was not a crash caused by mechanical failure or pilot action. It would mean it was an operation. At the time, most people avoided talking about the cargo. The conversation focused on the pilot and satellite data. But not everyone was willing to look away. Richard Godfrey reviewed the shipping records and public statements. He later said that the cargo manifest made little sense to him. He noticed details that had been dismissed by investigators. He believed that buried in the documentation were quiet signs of something far more serious. And he began to track patterns that no one else was looking for. That quiet work would later lead him to a place the world had not searched. A place connected to data everyone had seen, but no one had fully understood. The military saw everything, but stayed silent. When MH370 disappeared from civilian radar, it crossed into one of the most closely monitored airspaces on Earth. The region is covered by overlapping military systems. Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia Each operate long-range radar capable of detecting aircraft far beyond their borders. The United States maintains advanced tracking equipment through its bases in the Indian Ocean, including Diego Garcia. These are not passive systems. They record everything. And yet, almost no data was ever made public. Malaysia eventually admitted it had tracked the plane for over an hour after it vanished from civilian screens. That admission came late, under pressure, and lacked technical detail. Thailand waited even longer to say anything. Indonesia said almost nothing at all. The United States denied any involvement. None of these countries released raw radar data. None explained why they withheld information during the most critical hours of the investigation. Aviation experts and defense analysts agree that MH370 was almost certainly tracked by military radar long after it went dark. But no government stepped forward to say what they knew. Some believe the silence was meant to protect radar capabilities. Others believe it was to hide something more damaging. Richard Godfrey would later say that this silence changed everything for him. It told him that people in power knew more than they admitted, and that someone, somewhere, had decided to say nothing. What he did next would make that silence impossible to ignore. Richard Godfrey's wild idea that might not be so wild. Richard Godfrey was not satisfied with what the world had accepted. He had spent years studying the data from MH370. But, unlike others, he did not trust the assumptions behind the satellite tracking. He believed that something had been missed. Instead of relying on the same broken tools, he turned to a little-known system used by amateur radio operators around the world. It is called WSPR. That stands for Weak Signal Propagation Reporter. WSPR is not used for aircraft tracking. It was designed to test how radio signals move across long distances. Every 2 minutes, radio enthusiasts in different countries send out extremely weak signals. Each one uses less than 1 watt of power, which is even weaker than a basic nightlight. These signals are picked up by other stations and logged into a shared database. Because the signals bounce off the Earth's atmosphere, they can travel thousands of kilometers. The result is a global pattern of signal paths that crisscross the planet at all times. Godfrey had a theory. He believed that when a large object like an airplane crosses through one of these radio paths, it causes a small disruption. These disruptions are not easy to spot, but with enough data and the right software, they can be detected. He knew that all WSPR signal activity is stored in a public archive called WSPR.net. This archive includes timestamps, sender and receiver locations, and signal strength. He created his own software to dig through the huge WSPR archive. The program looked at billions of records and removed anything that could cause false results. This included weather events, solar storms, and ordinary background interference. After stripping away all of that, he was left with 130 signal changes that could not be explained by natural causes. Each of these changes appeared at the exact time and in the exact regions where MH370 would have been flying. When he plotted them, they connected to form multiple parts of a possible flight path. The matches were so consistent that they could not be dismissed as random coincidence. At first, many experts dismissed his work. WSPR was not meant to track planes. But the more people looked, the more serious the evidence appeared. Godfrey had not only shown a pattern, he had traced the plane's movement in a way no one had ever done before. These invisible signals, ignored for years, were now pointing somewhere specific. And Godfrey was about to tell the world where that place was. Where MH370 really is. After reviewing 107 signal disturbances from the WSPR system, Richard Godfrey traced them carefully across space and time. He used exact timestamps recorded by the WSPR network. Each radio signal includes the time it was sent and received, as well as the location of the sending and receiving stations. By mapping where disturbances appeared at specific times, he was able to calculate how fast the object was moving and in which direction. When those data points were plotted in sequence, they lined up like a trail of footprints. This trail followed a consistent path that matched the expected cruising speed of a Boeing 777. When he connected them, they created a flight path. This path did not just show where the plane ended. It showed where it went, how it moved, and how long it stayed in the air. It also revealed something that no one had clearly seen before. The plane had traveled much farther north than anyone expected, then continued west across the Indian Ocean before reaching its final point. That point was 29.128 degrees south and 99.934 degrees east. This area lies in a very deep ocean, about 1,500 kilometers west of Perth, Australia. It is also about 200 kilometers north of the last official search zone. No sonar or search operation has ever covered this part of the ocean floor. Here is the disturbing part. The path showed turns, altitude changes, and pauses that suggest the aircraft was being flown with clear intent. It was not drifting. It was not falling. It followed a direction for hours. The final part of the path shows the plane descending slowly toward the ocean. There is no signal pattern indicating a sharp dive or sudden brake. Instead, it ends in a way that suggests a controlled approach into the water. This behavior does not match a random crash. It points to long-term planning. Someone may have flown the aircraft for hours before guiding it into the sea. This raises serious and disturbing questions. Why would the pilot go to such lengths to reach that specific location? Was it an act of protest? Was the goal to disappear without a trace? Could someone on board have been forced to follow that path? Was this the result of external pressure, blackmail, or something even darker? The WSPR data cannot reveal motive, but it confirms behavior that fits an intentional disappearance. This was not the path of a plane in distress. It was the path of a flight being managed all the way to the end. Unfortunately, the most terrifying part is that no one knows why. That answer may still be inside the aircraft. And that is why attention now turns to the ocean floor. Because if the wreckage is really there, it might hold everything we still do not understand. But before anyone searched that spot, one final question had to be answered. Could this method actually be trusted in the real world? The tests, the science, and the 74% certainty. Richard Godfrey knew that raw signal data would not be enough to convince the world. He needed independent experts to check whether the signals could truly point to a real crash location. He brought his findings to researchers at the University of Liverpool, who used a method called Bayesian probability modeling. This method takes a known event like a plane disappearing and compares it to many possible explanations using data patterns. It then calculates which outcome is most likely, based on all the evidence available. In this case, the researchers fed the WSPR signal path, timing, and flight movement into the model. They tested how well the signal trail matched what would be expected from a plane like MH370 traveling that specific route. The model then ran a large number of simulations to compare Godfrey's proposed location with other possibilities. After all simulations were complete, the model gave a result. There was a 74% probability that MH370 came to rest in the exact area that Godfrey had identified. That figure was high enough to make experts take notice, especially since this same method had helped locate the wreckage of Air France Flight 447 more than a decade earlier. This level of confidence drew serious attention, but probability still needed proof. To test whether WSPR could detect aircraft in real time, investigators flew a Boeing 777 through the same stretch of ocean where MH370 had vanished. The result was immediate. The WSPR system showed clear signal disturbances exactly where the test plane was flying, matched down to the minute. This confirmed that an aircraft could trigger measurable shifts in the signal paths. Other forms of validation followed. Experts compared the WSPR signal times with earlier satellite pings recorded by Inmarsat. The timestamps aligned, confirming that the two systems had tracked the plane along the same segments of its route. Researchers also examined the paths of each disrupted signal. When plotted, the geometry showed those signals intersecting at key locations on the suspected flight path. These crossing points formed anchors in the data that further supported the location. Investigators also ran a drift simulation. They traced where debris from MH370 had washed up on beaches in Réunion and Madagascar. When they reversed those paths using ocean current models, the simulation pointed back to the same zone that Godfrey had identified. Even Joe Taylor, the Nobel Prize-winning scientist who helped develop WSPR, reviewed the idea. He confirmed that aircraft can, in fact, disturb WSPR signals. While he remained cautious about drawing final conclusions, his response gave weight to the method's core principle. Each test brought more certainty, and each layer of evidence narrowed the search zone. Now, after years of failure, silence, and doubt, one final step remained. Someone had to go to that spot and look. The new search. In March 2025, the Malaysian government made a decision that many believed would never come. They signed a new agreement with Ocean Infinity, a private deep-sea exploration company. The mission is clear: search a 15,000 square kilometer zone centered on the coordinates identified by Richard Godfrey. This is not a speculative sweep. It is a focused operation aimed at a single unsearched location. The agreement follows a no-find, no-fee model. Ocean Infinity will only be paid if they find the wreckage. That structure raises the stakes for everyone involved. It means that both the government and the company are committing to a result, not just another effort. Ocean Infinity's search vessel, the Armada 7806, is equipped with advanced underwater technology. On board are Hugin autonomous underwater vehicles. These robotic submarines can dive as deep as 6,000 meters. They do not require cables and can operate on their own for extended periods. Each unit uses high-resolution sonar to scan the ocean floor in extreme detail. The team plans to run continuous operations. If conditions hold, the area could be fully scanned in under 30 days. For the families who have waited over a decade, this search is a final hope. For investigators, it is a last chance to solve a case that has haunted the aviation world. And for the public, it is the moment when theories, silence, and doubt may finally be replaced with answers. Now all eyes turn to the ocean. What do you think about this discovery? Comment down below.